Hi, I'm Annie. If you'd like to book a one-on-one session with me, you can find my contact information in the description. So today I want to talk about summertime depression. So I'm going to talk about depression and I'm going to talk about summertime depression. And if you feel depressed, obviously you have to do what you think is best for you. I'm just going to talk about how I handled it. This is a thing that some people get. I'm not sure why some people get depressed in the summer. So typically when we talk about seasonal depression, people usually mean the darker months. Those are actually my favorite. I prefer November, December, and January. And by the way, happy September. I'm so excited because today is September 1st and I can feel the air changing and I love this time of year. Fall is my #1 favorite season. Labor Day is one of my favorite holidays. That's maybe an unusual holiday to be a favorite, but what I love about it is the feeling of transitioning into fall, and I get really SI, like start organizing my space for the winter, just kind of like reevaluating, getting rid of stuff I don't need, and I rearrange my furniture a little bit for the colder months because I just have like different needs with my wood stove being really hot. I'm just so excited, and especially this year because I'm getting my firewood delivered tomorrow, September 2nd, which is just perfect because I don't need it yet, but I like knowing that I'm ready for when we get that first really cold day and I'm ready to build my first fire. I'll start chopping the wood and, preparing the wood burning system so that it runs efficiently over the fall and winter. So just really happy that it's September 1st. So anyway, summertime depression. Some people get this. I kind of tried to do some research about it, but there wasn't any clear reason why. A lot of the reasons pointed to circumstantial things, like people having body image issues. There's like a lot of pool parties and we wear less clothing. So sometimes people with body image issues have a difficult time in the summer. I don't really feel like that's my reason. I might have felt a little bit of that when I was younger because I did have some insecurity about like not being a super thin person because I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So in the 80s, women were really thin and, everyone was dieting. And then in the 90s, there was like the whole heroin chic thing, or was that the early 2000s? But you know what I mean? Like the flat as a board person. While I'm really small, I'm a little person. I'm kind of soft and round, kind of like a tiny little chubby person. So that might have been a thing in the past. Something that I noticed about 3 or 4 years ago, and I can't believe it took me this long to put these things together because, my sleep processing is really high. And so I'm very introspective and I can usually put things together and figure out why I feel a certain way. But I did realize about 3 or 4, 7 years ago, I don't know, time flies, that I tend to have a low mood and depression in August. And I suddenly realized it's probably a psychosomatic thing. So on August 2nd, 1985, my dad died in a plane crash. And I never knew the date. Because I was 8 years old, I wasn't aware that the date of the crash was August 2nd. And yet I had this sort of like low mood in August. I was well into my 30s that I came across the actual date when that happened. And then something clicked and I thought like, oh, well, maybe that's the depression. Maybe it's like a psychosomatic thing. Could be. I mean, I'm not processing that. That was over 30 years ago that happened. And I feel like that is all processed and settled. Although something like that never is really completely settled. I mean, that's just how grief is. It doesn't ever completely go away. And it was like a traumatic event that happened to me when I was 8. What I really want to talk about is how my mood was low in August, but it was totally different this time. I handled it differently. The low mood, or the depression, if you want to put a label on it, felt essentially the same as any other depression that I've ever had. Like everything was just as flat, just as uninspired, just as blah, just as unmotivated. It felt just as icky as all the times in the past, except I handled it better this time because of all the healthy habits that I've been working on, healthy habits of exercise, diet, sleep, but also thinking, really working on my mood as a habit and my thoughts as a habit. And so this time around, when I felt the low mood, I was more removed from it, just observing it. I had more of these tactics of allowing, accepting, distancing myself. So I've gotten to a point in my life where I can be slightly uncomfortable without suffering. I can be in pain without suffering. And I'm talking about like physical, mental, or emotional pain. I can experience pain without suffering. And there really is a distinction there. The pain is just a feeling. It's just a mood. But But suffering usually occurs when we really resist that mood and refuse it and say to ourselves, no, I'm not going to feel that. I reject that. Or when we cling to it, when we make it part of our identity. This time around, when I felt the low mood, I had all these tactics in place where I was really working on staying in that observer perspective. And part of it was looking at the mood with curiosity, an attitude of, oh, isn't that interesting? I'm having a low mood right now. Wow, that's interesting. Everything seems really gray and flat, and I'm not very inspired or motivated, and I feel kind of gross. Gee, that's interesting. What should we do with that? What should we do with this depression? And then I put all these proactive things in place because I know that my mood is low. I know that it's a sensitive time because of this low mood. I don't want to step down onto that downward spiral and just have it get worse and worse and worse. I was very conscious of what I did with my habits. Getting sleep, keeping the sleep routine the same, which I'm pretty good at anyway. That's kind of natural for me. Making sure the diet is good, making sure the exercise schedule is regular, because the last thing you want to do when you're already having depression and low mood is let go of your healthy habits. Say like, oh, I'm too depressed to go on a walk today, when going on a walk is your normal routine. And another thing that I've learned about habits is that I don't need to want to do the thing in order to do it. And so that's the tactic that I was employing. There were some days when I didn't want to go on a morning walk, but I just told myself, hey, you don't need to want to do it in order to do it. You just do it. You just put on some nice music in the headphones, you go out, you walk for 40 minutes. And then on certain days when I really, really didn't feel like it, I would say to myself, well, go on a walk for 10 minutes, walk around the block. And then, you can get around the block and you think like, okay, no, I'm already moving, I'm feeling okay. And so you keep going a little bit further. So I use those really like practical kind of tactics. And then I also referred to my to-do list. So when I'm uninspired and everything feels really flat and gray and boring and yucky, I will just simply refer to my to-do list and do the things on the list. So I don't need to be inspired in order to get things done. And so keeping busy in that way made me feel better. On the morning walks, I was also really working on my thoughts, observing the thoughts that came in. And if a thought was really negative, then I would just question it. First of all, allow it. Like, it's okay. Thoughts come and go. It's okay to have negative thoughts, but you observe them kind of from an impartial distance. It's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Look at that negative thought. And then you're really aware if the thought repeats over and over and over again, you can just stop it and question it every time. That's all you have to do. You don't beat yourself up about the negative thought repeating. You just say to yourself, that's interesting. There's that thought again. You are the boss of your thoughts just by simply observing them. So nothing can get past you. It's like you're a lifeguard sitting in a really tall chair looking out over a pool, looking out over the thoughts. You're just observing them and keeping track. Like, there's a negative thought. Interesting. Oh, there's another one. Interesting. So you're not getting caught up in it and identifying with it. And that really helps. That's all you have to do. Another thing that I noticed, which was really interesting, is that while I was doing a good job observing my thoughts, I did kind of slip into more neuroticism, like more anxiety and neuroticism. So when I noticed that happening, it was just the noticing again, like, oh wow, I'm getting neurotic. Because there's really a difference between sleep processing and rumination. Because sleep processing is going over the known information and maybe putting things together and figuring things out. And I was doing some of that, but then I noticed that I also slipped into this neurotic rumination where it was like repetitive thoughts beating myself up or being pessimistic. So I would just stop myself and question it. I also noticed that in my journal, I've mentioned this before, I write in the third person. So it might be something like, she's been sleeping really well lately. She's had a lot of healthy habits, and that probably led to her sleeping really well at night. Or she had a really bad day because she did this and this and this. These were her habits. Perhaps that's why she had a bad day. So it's just in the third person. It helps me keep that observer perspective on myself. And I do this like every day. So I'm really used to writing that way. I don't use the word I in my journal. But I noticed on a couple of the days I slipped into I. I feel like shit. I'm having a really bad month. And that's so interesting because that's a clear indication that I am identifying with the struggle and the pain. It's not necessary to identify with it. So if you think about a sky has clouds that come in and out. It has weather that comes in and out, but the sky is always the same. The sky is just the sky. It's constant. And there is something within yourself that is always that. It's always okay. It's just neutral. It's just open. It's just sort of the screen on which things happen, you know, like a movie screen. So there's something inside that is just neutral and peaceful, and it's just this existence. It's this like I am kind of thing. I exist. I am. And that is okay. And so I was sort of purposely reconnecting with that neutral, just I am okayness over and over again. And that's one of the things that I focused on in my morning walk. So a lot of this is like mindfulness, Buddhist stuff that I used to never really understand. You know, when people talk about the power of mindfulness, the power of observing your thoughts, I didn't really get it, or maybe I kind of got it, but I didn't actually put it into practice. Well, I have been putting it into practice over the last few years. And I think that's why when this low mood came this time, it was just easy to manage, easy to bear. It's no big deal. It's like, oh, I'm in a low mood. That's not great, but it's okay. Moving on. Let's, keep, doing proactive things, and just a recognition that on some level I'm okay. It's okay to have a bad mood, just like it's okay to have a cloudy day. So that's all. Happy September. Moving into fall. Have a great last hurrah for the end of summer. Do all your camping and all your last summer barbecues, and have a good time moving into autumn.